Our first speaker, Daniel Ellsberg, was employed by the Rand Corporation when he began working on the top secret Pentagon Papers analysis of decision-making in the Vietnam War. Of course, those later became known as the Pentagon Papers. Struck by an uncompromising conscience, Daniel proceeded to photograph all 7,000 of the pages of the Pentagon Papers, and then proceeded to release them to the Washington Post, the New York Times, and other publications, knowing full well what the likely, almost certain consequences were going to be. And of course, those consequences materialized. The Richard Nixon administration indicted him on 12 felony counts, espionage, releasing official secrets, and so forth. Even though the Pentagon Papers was just a straight, truthful analysis of how we had gotten into the war. And then as the trial, they actually went to trials. The trial proceeding was before a jury. All of the revelations about Watergate start coming out, and including the illegal break-in, not only of the Watergate building, of course, but of Daniel's psychiatrist's office. And at this point, before the case reaches a jury for a verdict, his lawyers move for dismissal based on wrongful misconduct of the government. And as far as I know, I think it's the only case, and there may be others, but I think it's the only case where a felony indictment, federal felony indictment, has been dismissed because of wrongful misconduct by the government. His book, Secrets, which I'd highly recommend, goes into all of this. It was reached the bestseller list across the nation, received many awards, including the Los Angeles Times Award for Best Book. And so it's a real honor to have this man with us. I mean, this is a life of courage. This is a life of principle. Please welcome Daniel Ellsberg, who's talking on the need for Pentagon Papers today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, when I was invited to come here and I saw the list of speakers, I accepted very promptly because antiwar.com is my home page, it so happens, on my computer, my default page. So the chance to see in the flesh people I'd been reading, Rockwell, Higgs, Bovard, my friend Justin Raimondo, seen before, Karen Kwiatkowski, and so on. That was a wonderful opportunity. And Ron Paul. Where is Paul Craig Roberts, by the way? I love his stuff. He didn't make it here. But that's a real treat. It's also been a little unusual experience for me in this particular crowd to have so many people come up and greet me very warmly and say, I used to think you were a traitor. And of course, I'm glad to hear they're recovering, but still, it is a reminder. It is a reminder that there are still a lot of people out there, no doubt, some of whom you may know, who see it in that light. As one person said to me, I won't give his name, but in the lunch line today, if my mother knew I was in the same audience with you, she'd be shocked. You know, she would die. And I said, well, don't tell her. And I said, how about your father? He said, I don't know. So he just told me just now that he checked with his father, who was fine with it. But he told his father not to tell the mother. They were here with me. Well, it was very unsettling for me as an American 35 years ago to be hearing from so many fellow Americans, or be told about other fellow Americans who thought that telling the truth to Congress and to the public could be treasonous. Actually, that wasn't among the 12 counts of felonies that I was charged with. Even my prosecutor, who hung everything on me he could think of, did not find me guilty of attempting to aid and give comfort to the enemy. And as somebody whose life had been spent, really, as I thought, patriotically from the time of Pearl Harbor, which I remember very well when I was 10. Some of you I remember were even older than that, and a lot not. And who enlisted in the Marines later during the Korean emergency and extended for a year because of the Suez crisis when my battalion was going to the Fleet, and we were expecting to be involved in some kind of a war there, which we were, actually, the Suez Crisis. My ship evacuated 1,500 civilians, not too violent an operation, from Alexandria during the harbor, while the British and French were bombing the harbor, in fact. And I remember at that time being very proud, as somebody who had not voted for Eisenhower, but proud of my president, Eisenhower then, who had defined as aggression an act by our two closest allies, the French and the British, not to speak of the Israelis, who weren't as clear-cut an ally at that point. And I thought that was wonderful. That's why I joined the Marines. That's why I went in during Korea. The idea of fighting aggression seemed to me a very, very worthy project, and I was proud to be able to do that as a Marine. It so happened that before we did the evacuation, we were steaming toward the southeast corner of the Mediterranean, and I was at that point an operations officer. Before I extended, I had been a company commander, but I lost that as I was about to get out. I was replaced by a major, so I was a first lieutenant at the time. And, but I was now an operations officer, and I was making a plan. They broke out the top secret war plans of the Sixth Fleet, so I could do landing plans based on that. And I was doing a plan for Haifa, and the other assistant operations officer next to me was making a plan for Alexandria. And depending on which side the president decided we were at war with. And my assumption was if we had to use my plan against the Israelis, we would probably not do too well after months at sea. But if we had to land at Alexandria, an opposed landing, we would cut through them, we were very sure, without any problem. In those days, I remember, I didn't care that much. I was pleased in the end that we went against the aggressor in this case. Not that I was a fan of Egypt, but that was well, we sided, I should say, against the aggressor. And but really, as a former Marine company commander who extended to be with the battalion I'd also been training officer for, and a company that I had been the company commander of, and commanded a number of platoons, I had not wanted to read about their being in some kind of combat while I was back at Harvard enjoying a fellowship in the Society of Fellows. So I gave up that fellowship. I was able to reapply a year later. And I gave it up, because you couldn't get an extension on it, to be with my battalion. So at that point, as I say, I really didn't care too much and didn't regard it as mine to think about which side the president would decide we would be on. And that's the state of mind that I had, I think, when I went in to the government later in 1964, having been a consultant to the government for a number of years at the Rand Corporation before that. So I started to say earlier, for somebody whose life been spent fighting communism, as I saw it, and that's why I went to Vietnam in the end for the State Department, and for this country, it's very disconcerting to be called a traitor or to have people think of you that way. And the first couple of hundred times you hear that, it's quite shocking. I used to think that it's something you never get used to. But actually, in the last few years, the word has been so devalued that not to have Ann Coulter call you a traitor is like being left off of Nixon's enemies list. I had friends who have never fully recovered from that, actually, having looked for their name, you know, on the list. Others who say, I was on higher than you, I was on the... Dan Shore is very proud of that. But I noticed just today, for example, in the Washington Post, in Mike Kinsley's column, he mentions that McCain, quote, came very close to accusing his two Democratic rivals, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, of treason, because, this is today now, because, as he said in a speech recently, they were advocating surrender in the thing. And of course, you can come closer than that. This administration has quite a bit.